Hey everybody, it's Arglefumph. This is another Nancy Drew parody story that I've written. I'd tell you the name, but I'm going to let Nancy do that here in Chapter 1, A Letter to Carson. Dear Dad, is it kind of weird that I'm always writing letters to you, even though we live in the same house? I think that's kind of weird. Anyway, the wealthy owner of a research facility in Colorado has asked me to investigate a cold murder case. It seems that Niko Jovic, a brilliant researcher, was killed while on the verge of announcing a groundbreaking scientific theory. The murder weapon? A Tesla coil that Niko was working with. I don't know who this Tesla guy is, but he's at the top of my suspect list now. I'm calling this case the Deadly Plot Device. See you soon, Nancy. So this story is based on Nancy Drew, The Deadly Device. I think it's number 27 in the Nancy Drew series. Chapter 2, Arriving in Colorado. It was snowing in Colorado when Nancy arrived at Lossett Labs. Oh, I think I got the name wrong. Isn't it the Technology of Tomorrow Center? Victor Lossett is her boss. That's why, I don't know, the name Lossett Labs sounds like a good name, yeah? Well, Nancy picked up her cell phone and called Victor Lossett, her current employer. Nancy, Victor said, you arrived safely? Sure did, Nancy said. So what's the plan here? The police report is inside Niko's desk drawer, Victor said. The combination is 171943. Read that before doing anything else. Got it, Nancy said. What's my cover? You're working for a new investor who's thinking about buying the lab, Victor said. I'll back you up in case anyone asks. Sounds good to me, Nancy said. Do whatever you want, except go in the lab, Victor said. It's too dangerous for you to go poking around inside. But that's where the murder took place, Nancy said. How am I supposed to solve the murder mystery if I'm not allowed to see the scene of the crime? Fine, I'll ask Ellie to set up a demo for you, Victor said, but that's it. I don't want any more people dying in the laboratory. Besides, the police already investigated that area thoroughly. Did they find anything? Nancy asked. They found evidence which pointed towards Ryan's guilt, Victor said. She built the part that killed Niko, and supposedly she threatened him. I suggest you start with her. Understood, Nancy said. Call me if you need anything, Victor said. He hung up the phone, but Nancy immediately called him back. Nancy? Victor asked, sounding surprised. Is there a problem? I need $50, Nancy said. Can you give it to me? No! Victor shouted. He hung up again. Shoot, Nancy said. Chapter 3, The Case File. Nancy started her case by going straight to Niko's personal office. The office was dominated by a large bookcase and a large portrait of Nikola Tesla. Nancy instantly recognized Nikola Tesla thanks to some research she did on Tesla coils during her flight to Colorado. If she remembered correctly, the Tesla coil was named after its inventor, Dr. Stephen Coyle. Nikola Tesla, on the other hand, was named after his parents, Mr. and Mrs. Tesla. Nancy went to Niko's desk and typed in the combination 171943. The drawer opened, revealing the police case file. A post-it note from Victor reminded Nancy to not take the case file out of the room. Nancy read the file, which had profiles of all the various people involved in the case. Niko Jovic, the victim, 5-time winner of the ugly Christmas sweater competition. Ryan Kilpatrick, the main suspect, a wacky mechanic who wears goggles for no apparent reason, works on the day shift. Gray Courtwright, the security guard, a grumpy old guy with a beard. Victor Lossett, owner of the labs, also a grumpy old guy with a beard. Mason Quinto works the day shift, a grumpy young guy with no beard. Doesn't seem to fit in with the other men. Ellie York works on the night shift, first to discover the body. Nancy left the office and explored the downstairs area. At the moment, it was daytime, which meant that the security booth was locked. Security was right next to the doors to the lab, which were protected by a keycard reader. The only other interesting thing downstairs were a security alarm, a doorway to the lounge, and Nancy's newest nemesis, the slow elevator of slowness. It was creaky, it was old, and Nancy didn't like using it one bit. Nancy rode the elevator upstairs. She couldn't help but picture the elevator's machinery breaking down, causing her to plummet to her death. You'd think a high-tech lab would be able to afford an elevator made in this century, Nancy thought. Upstairs, there were two main areas, the work offices and the tech laboratory. Outside the tech area was a poster which said, 15 things about electricity which you don't care about. Next to each number was a binary code represented by blue and red dots. Nancy quickly dismissed this as unimportant information which would never become relevant to the case. Chapter 4. Mason. Nancy walked into the office area. At first, she thought walking was a boring way to make an entrance, so she decided to moonwalk into the office areas. She tripped and fell 3 times before deciding to walk like a normal person the rest of the way. The office area was rather empty. There were 2 cubicles, one for Mason and one for Ellie. In the back of the room was a small break area with a book on electricity sitting on a coffee table. Nancy decided to pocket it. The book, not the table. It was daytime, so only Mason was working at the moment. Nancy walked into his cubicle to talk. If it looks like I'm busy, that means I'm busy, Mason said in an irritated voice. What are you working on? Nancy asked. It's immensely complicated, Mason said, rolling his eyes. Get a postgrad in electrical engineering, then you might begin to understand it. Nancy bit her lip. Your computer monitor is off, she noted. How can you work without your computer on? Mason's right eye wrinkled. A better question is, why are you here, stranger? He shot back at her. I'm here doing due diligence for a new investor, Nancy said. I think Victor wants to sell the lab and work at some place with less death, like McDonald's. Wrong, Mason said. There's a lot of death at McDonald's? Nancy asked, confused. No, I mean, wrong answer for me, Mason said. I was hoping I could kick you out of my workspace. But if you're here for a new investor, that means I have to answer all of your questions. Cool, Nancy said. So how do you like working here? Do you like the other employees? Did you and Niko? Let me cut you off there, Mason said, cutting Nancy off there. I don't like anyone. You don't? Nancy asked. Nope. Check this out. Mason slowly and dramatically gave a big thumbs down. He nodded enthusiastically at this. Other people, he said. You give other people a thumbs down? Nancy asked. No! No! You monster! Whoa, calm down, Mason said, holding up his hands. I'm just being honest here. But you can't dislike everyone, Nancy said. Yes, I can, Mason said. I have good reasons to dislike all my co-workers. Victor's overbearing, Ryan is a spaz, Ellie is a phony, Gray thinks he gets to control my life, and Niko was a thief. Niko was a thief? Nancy asked. Yes, Mason said. He was constantly stealing my work and taking credit for it. I'm glad he's no longer working here. Okay, so you don't like other people, Nancy said. What about Ryan in particular? What makes you dislike her? I don't trust her, Mason said. Not because she's been accused of killing Niko. I don't trust her because I don't trust anyone I can't explain. Which, come to think of it, includes every woman I've ever met. What about your mother? Nancy asked. Especially my mother, Mason said. Ryan's thought processes are all over the place. I think logically, from A to B to C and so on. Ryan, she thinks from A to zucchini, to that thing on TV last night, to maybe C, to gummy bears. Do you think she killed Niko? Nancy asked. Maybe, Mason said. But just because she's crazy, it doesn't mean she's a killer. Chapter 5. Ryan. Nancy soon decided there wasn't much to the office area, outside of Ellie and Mason's cubicles. There was a water cooler, some chairs, and a book on Tesla coils, but that was about it. Nancy pocketed the book and left for the workshop. Wait, didn't I just read that? Going backwards a bit. Yes, here it is. The office area was rather empty. There were 2 cubicles, one for Mason and one for Ellie. In the back of the room was a small break area, with a book on electricity sitting on the coffee table. Nancy decided to pocket it. The book, not the table. Oh man. I gave the same basic description 2 chapters in a row, and this one was actually funnier. Not that either description was too particularly funny. Oh, sorry about that. That's definitely author error. Chapter 5, Ryan. She's the funny character of the game, right? Nancy soon decided there wasn't much to the office area outside of Ellie and Mason's cubicles. There was a water cooler, some chairs, and a book on Tesla coils, but that was about it. Nancy pocketed the book and left for the workshop. Ryan Kilpatrick, the main suspect, worked in this area. When Nancy came in, Ryan was at a work table struggling with what looked like a wrench. Nancy couldn't see it clearly because Ryan's body was in the way. Ryan gave a grunt and a huge push. Suddenly, a bolt went flying across the room and nearly smacked Nancy in the head. Nancy gave a small shriek of surprise. "Oh my gosh, I am so sorry about that," Ryan said. "I did not mean to almost kill you right there. Are we cool?" "Cool?" Nancy asked, slightly taken aback. Usually when someone almost killed her, they didn't apologize. "I mean, it's reasonable to freak out over a near-death experience, but that was a total accident," Ryan said. "You're lucky you didn't enter the room 1 second earlier, or you'd be lying on the floor unconscious." In fact, I have a PowerPoint presentation prepared just for a situation like this," Ryan said. "You want me to hit all the bullet points?" Nancy paused. Ryan seemed overly prepared for this situation. "How often have you almost killed someone?" Nancy asked. "Well, if you don't include that time in Puerto Rico, 6, Ryan said. Nancy could see why Ryan was the police's main suspect for Niko's death. I'm fine," Nancy reassured her. "My name's Nancy Drew. I'm here doing research for a new investor." "I'm Ryan," Ryan said. "I build things like circuit boards and motorcycle engines and deadly devices. If you've got any questions about machines, I'm your girl." "Sounds good to me," Nancy said. "Nice meeting you, Ryan." Ryan and Nancy shook hands, and Ryan got back to whatever it was. What is she doing throughout this game? She's just kind of playing on her workbench, I guess. Ryan got back to whatever it was she was doing. Nancy looked around a bit at the workshop area. Tools were scattered around haphazardly, but other than that, it was mostly clean. Inside one of the cabinets, Nancy found a blank key card along with a sheet of colored paper. Nancy took both of them, as she thought they would be important for getting into the locked lab. Chapter 6, A Power Outage. Nancy was kind of bored. It had only been 5 minutes, and she got all the way through her investigation for the day. That is basically all the investigation you can do during the first daytime segment of the game. She decided to get back to her bedroom so she could jump on her computer and send an angry email about how short the game was. As soon as Nancy stepped into the lounge area, the lights flickered and turned off. Before you could say, "conveniently timed phone call," Nancy's phone rang. "Hello, Nancy," said Victor's voice. "I forgot to mention, we've been having a lot of power outages recently." "What?" Nancy asked. "Isn't this a super high-tech facility that deals in creating new forms of energy?" "Yes," Victor said. "And you can't afford to pay the electric bills?" Nancy asked. "It's a complicated situation," Victor said. "The machines here are very delicate, with precise settings. If something goes wrong, the entire system tends to get unruly." Nancy sincerely hoped that did not mean the machines would explode and kill her. And how often does the power supply get disrupted? Not often, Victor said. Gray does a good job keeping the machines at the proper levels, so don't worry about it. I'm sure this is just a one-time thing. And in fact, if you play the game, it is a one-time thing. It never happens again. Kind of weird it happens at the start and then never again. You'd think it would be important and come up later. Nancy wondered if the power outage was a plot device, while Victor hung up on her. She shrugged, then headed through the lounge to the bedroom. Walking through a room in the dark proved to be a bit more difficult than our favorite detective could handle, however. Ow! Nancy said, stubbing her toe against a chair. Ouch! Nancy said as she smashed into a cabinet. Ah! Nancy shouted as she tripped on a skateboard, smashed into a television, and broke a priceless painting by Michelangelo, who is one of the coolest Ninja Turtles. Eventually, Nancy stumbled her way into the bedroom area, covered in bruises. She collapsed onto the bed, then grabbed the alarm clock. Even though there was a power outage, the alarm clock was still functioning perfectly. The touchscreen had two settings, night and day. Nancy tapped night, then got into her bed and fell asleep. I wonder what time of night she wakes up. Like, it could wake her up at 2 a.m. in the morning. That would technically be night. Chapter 7, Fixing the Grid. Many hours later, the emergency alarm sounded and woke Nancy up. She threw her hands in the air and shouted, "Overweight popsicles!" before falling out of bed. Rubbing her forehead, Nancy stood up. She stumbled out into the lounge, which looked relatively normal. When she opened the door leading to the main part of the building, she saw a man with glasses and a beard. "You," the man said, pointing at Nancy, "come with me." He turned around, and Nancy got a good look of his plaid coat. "Wait, what?" Nancy asked. "What's going on?" "No chit-chat," he said. "Come, now!" The man led Nancy to the laboratory, and he shoved her towards a machine on the right wall. The machine had lights, cables, and 16 switches. It looked very scientific and complicated. Nancy had no idea what it did. "We need to get the system shut off before the grid goes critical," the man said. "Get all those switches shut off. I'll do the rest." How do I do that?" Nancy asked. "Just flip the switches," the man said. "You want to shut them all off." Nancy scratched her head, confused. "Do you usually force complete strangers to solve your electrical problems?" she asked. "I mean, I'm just a random high schooler. Maybe you should ask one of the electrical engineers who work here." "There's no time for that," the man said. "We can't let the grid go critical." Yeah, why couldn't Ellie come downstairs and solve this problem for Gray? I guess he never thought of calling her. Maybe she's just not answering her phone at this point in the game? Nancy sighed. While the man did whatever, she went to the machine. She quickly found the source of the problem. 2 of the switches were being held in place by plastic ties. "A deadly plot device," Nancy said. "Whoever tied down these switches wanted to destroy this facility." Nancy played around with the switches. Flipping a switch would affect the switches next to it, and each switch had 3 different power settings. The entire switchboard had a reset button, which was less helpful than you'd imagine, seeing as it didn't set the switches to the default off position. Eventually, Nancy gave up on trying to solve the switches puzzle, and she simply unplugged the entire machine. "Nice work," the fat man said, sounding impressed. He frowned at Nancy and gestured towards the door. "Now get out." "Hey, I deserve an explanation," Nancy said. "Who are you? What just happened?" "If the grid had gone critical, we'd all be dead right now," the man said intensely. "I'm Gray. I don't care who you are. Don't tell me. Get out!" That is kind of what Gray says when he introduces himself to Nancy in the game. I did try to change some of the dialogue while keeping most of it intact. Chapter 8, Nancy gets electrocuted. Nancy scratched her head. According to the case file, both Ellie and Gray worked during the night. Since Gray seemed like a meanie, Nancy decided to visit Ellie. That meant another ride on the slow elevator of slowness to the workspace area. Ellie York worked in the cubicle opposite of Mason's. She seemed a bit tired, but otherwise she was pleasant. "Hello, Nancy," Ellie said. "Victor said you're here for a new investor. Ready for the tour of the lab?" Nancy smiled as Ellie led her to the downstairs lab. This was the area where Niko died. Nancy was certain to find clues here. Nancy started to do her "the mystery is almost solved" dance. The next thing Nancy knew, she was locked inside a cage. She could see no way to open it from the inside. Yeah, that's kind of mean in the game where Ellie's like, "Okay, I'll let you see the lab." Next thing you know, Nancy's in a cage. "This is called a Faraday cage," Ellie said from the control room. "It conducts electricity away from the Tesla coil." Is this the coil Niko was working on when he died?" Nancy asked, turning pale. She didn't like the idea of being near a machine which killed a man. "Yes," Ellie said. "Now get ready. I'm going to turn on the electricity." "I really don't think that's a good idea," Nancy moaned. Suddenly, brilliant bursts of electricity flew throughout the room. Nancy was almost blinded by the bright lights, and she immediately went into the fetal position, crying like a maniac. "I'm going to die! I'm going to die just like Niko! This is the worst tour ever!" Eventually, Ellie turned off the electricity and led Nancy away from the deadly device. Misspelled lead there. Sorry about that. On the way back upstairs, Nancy made a mental note to update her profile on Ellie. Ellie York tries to electrocute people shortly after meeting them. #1 suspect! Nancy was still a bit shaken from her third near-death experience of the day. But she was a brave girl, so she didn't let herself get discouraged. She knew she would have to get back into the laboratory so she could explore without anyone watching her. So she asked, "Can you give me a keycard to the lab?" "No," Ellie said. Nancy frowned. Somehow she just knew that getting a keycard would be a long and complicated puzzle. Yeah, how much of the game would be skipped if Nancy could visit the lab at the very start? I don't know, like a third of the game, maybe? Chapter 9, Aggregation. Nancy had been hoping for a free pass to the laboratory, but for whatever reason, Ellie didn't trust a teenager to be alone at a murder scene. Nancy tried to butter Ellie up with some small talk. "Did you know Niko very well before his death?" "I don't think anyone knew Niko very well," Ellie said. "He liked to keep everything to himself. He was great with machines, but people? He didn't know how to deal with people." That seems to be quite common around here, Nancy thought to herself. "I see. And what about Mason? Do you like him?" "Let's just say there's a reason we work on opposite shifts," Ellie said evasively. "Oh ho!" Nancy said, realizing that Ellie disliked Mason. "Does this mean I can explore in his area?" "I wouldn't do that if I were you," Ellie said. "Mason doesn't like it when people mess around with his stuff." "But I'm really curious to see what he's hiding," Nancy said. Tell you what," Ellie said. "Mason's been lording his high score at Aggregation over me. Take him down, and I'll let you explore his cubicle all you want." Nancy readily agreed. She went downstairs. For some reason, she didn't want to explore in Ryan's area when Ryan was gone. Wait! That's true! Why doesn't Nancy ever get to search Ryan's area while Ryan's gone? Oh, yeah, that's because we've got a plot point that's inside Ryan's area. Right. Okay. Nancy went into the lounge. Near the doors was an arcade game called Aggregation. Nancy read the rules. You got points for making matches of 3. If you made all the matches on a board, you moved on to the next level. The rules reminded her of Candy Crush, one of her favorite games, so she started playing with a smile on her face. 20 minutes later, the smile was gone, as Nancy was still struggling to get past level 2. She made a blue match, and the game gave her a red piece when she needed a green one. With no useful pieces anywhere, she threw a purple piece on the board. The game gave her a green piece, only now the green piece match was blocked by the purple piece. "Arrgh," Nancy said. "Aggregation? More like aggravation. Why can't I beat this game?" According to Nancy's head calculator, she had to beat 10 levels to get the high score. But since each match gave her 30 points, she was able to eventually get all the points she needed after an hour. Yes! Nancy said. When the game prompted her to write her name, she wrote, "Mason is a doofus." She grinned as she hit enter. "Name is too long," the game screen said. "Automatically shortening it." The game shortened the name to Mason, which was put at the top of the high score list. "No!" Nancy howled with pain. So now Mason is the high score instead of Mason. After another hour of painful gameplay, Nancy finally got a new high score. This time she put her own name in. Sighing with relief, Nancy slowly trudged back upstairs to Ellie's area. I got the high score," Nancy said. "On aggregation. I got it." "Good," Ellie said, turning to the side. "This is me looking the other way." As Nancy entered Mason's cubicle, she wondered if it would have been easier to lie about beating the game. She shook her head. Lying was for culprits, not detectives. Chapter 10. Gray. Mason's cubicle was overly neat and boring, just like its owner. Nancy messed up his perfectly aligned paper clips and browsed through his book on making duplicates of fingerprints. "Ha! Like that information will ever come in handy," Nancy thought dismissively. His computer was password protected, so Nancy was forced to decipher the clues on Mason's whiteboard. Certain letters were underlined, and a game of hangman was at the bottom of the board. Nancy took note of the underlined letters and found out they spelled Tesla's hometown. Nancy tried typing in Tesla's hometown as the password, but the computer didn't accept it. She frowned. Nancy didn't know what Tesla's hometown was, but she could easily look up that information on the internet, and she sighed as she realized that the only computer in the area was password protected. She pulled out her cell phone and sent a quick text message to her friend, George Vane. George's response seemed excited, and she asked if Nancy could get her a job at Technology of Tomorrow, as long as Nancy was working at one of their labs. More importantly, George said the answer was Smiljan. Mason's computer accepted that as the password. Mason's computer didn't have much on it besides for technology work. In the computer's trash can, Nancy discovered a short text file which said Ryan should never have been released from jail. A video number was attached to her file, but the video itself was not. Nancy's task list let her check off Snoop in Mason's area, so she knew she found everything she could in his cubicle. She took the slow elevator of slowness downstairs, then took a moment to plan her next move. She decided that the video was probably footage from a security camera, which meant she had to go to the security office. Gray Courtwright was working at a set of 3 computer monitors. He turned to look at Nancy as she entered. "Don't know you," he said. "Who let you in?" We met earlier," Nancy said. "You forced me to fix the grid before it went critical." "The only grid I care about is the one on my waffle iron," Gray said. "What are you doing here?" "I'm here to inspect the lab," Nancy said. "My boss is interested in buying it." "A new owner. Just what this place needs." Gray rolled his eyes. "I'd like to ask a few questions, if that's okay," Nancy said. "Specifically, I want to learn more about your coworkers. What do you think of Ellie?" "Hate her," Gray said. "What about Ryan?" "Hate her," Gray said. "And Mason?" "Hate him," Gray said. "Do you like anyone?" Nancy asked. "I liked Niko, but he's dead now. I got no one left to be friendly with, which includes you, missy." Gray shot Nancy a nasty look, then turned back to his computers. Somehow, she got the feeling that Gray would not be very cooperative during the investigation. Chapter 11. Gray's computer. Nancy left the security lab. She needed to figure out a way to get rid of Gray. That way, she could use the security computers and watch the 2 video files she had numbers for. Nancy wandered over to the other side of the building where a security panel is located. "Ooh, what does this button do?" Nancy asked, pushing the big red button. The security light started flashing. Gray burst out of the security room and ran to the laboratory. Since he was kind of heavy, he didn't run very quickly. This meant Nancy had plenty of time to snoop before Gray returned. I think the game gives you something like 3 minutes to snoop in his area. I'm sure there won't be any negative repercussions for setting off a false alarm, Nancy said to herself. She casually strolled into the security offices and turned on Gray's computer. It had 4 icons. Nancy clicked on the security footage icon and typed in the video file numbers. The first video file was footage from the night of Niko's death. It showed Niko walking into the laboratory alone. Moments later, a bright light flashed, which Nancy presumed was from Niko's electrocution. The video ended there. Nancy squinted suspiciously. Why didn't the video show the murderer entering and leaving the lab's control room? Maybe the video was tampered with. Nancy typed in the other video number. The video showed Ryan breaking into the laboratory without using a keycard. Nancy was extremely interested when she saw this. Not because Ryan looked guilty, but because Nancy wanted to break into the laboratory herself. Maybe Ryan could give her tips about illegal breaking and entering. Of course, at this point in her life, Nancy had broken into more private, secure areas than most professional burglars. She was still slightly reticent about breaking into the lab because her boss directly told her not to. One of the icons on Gray's computer was some sort of log file. It was protected by a strange-looking puzzle. These symbols must represent binary code numbers, Nancy said out loud. I need to recreate all of the numbers using the colors on this wheel. Nancy blinked. How did I know that? She asked. Nancy vaguely recognized the colored dots from the poster upstairs. After playing around with the circle, she managed to solve the puzzle, despite having no idea what she was doing. This took her to a logbook. The log listed every time a keycard was used on the front doors of the lab. Every user ID was 10 digits long, which seemed a little excessive to Nancy, considering the lab only had 6 employees, including Niko. Nancy scrolled through the logbook until she reached the date of Niko's death. A strange number appeared there, and next to it was the note, System Override. This number appeared nowhere else in the logbook. I'll bet the murderer used that keycard to get into the lab, Nancy said, taking a mental note of it. If she could find that keycard, she would know the killer's identity. The third icon on Gray's computer led to a picture of the Halloween party at the lab. All of the male employees were gathered together for a group photo. Victor was dressed like Nikola Tesla, Niko was dressed like a Power Ranger, Mason was dressed as a computer, and Gray was wearing a pink mermaid costume. Shuddering slightly, Nancy closed the picture. Chapter 12, The Science Lab! The final thing on Gray's computer was a keycard creator. A small keycard device was near the computer. Nancy inserted the blank keycard that she got from Ryan's area, then she opened the program. It's locked, Nancy said. By a password. Nancy wasn't quite sure what the password was. To get the password, she would have to look at every single letter sticker in Gray's area, as well as one in Ryan's area. She would then have to put them in order according to the clock signs on each sticker. The hardest part would be not dying of boredom, as she put all the clues together in order to get the word Befurwatergulls. I don't recognize that word, Nancy thought to herself. Maybe it's French. The keycard creator was a rather odd device. It required her to stack tiles on each other in a specific order before the keycard would function properly. Nancy had been expecting something simpler, like a pop-up window, which said, make keycard, yes, no. Instead, she got colored tiles. Because of, scientific reasons. Nancy managed to solve the puzzle quickly, and she was quite proud of herself for being quite efficient with the puzzles in Gray's area. Hey, maybe that's why he's such a grumpy sourpuss, Nancy thought. He's tired of solving all the puzzles in the security room. I mean, there's a puzzle to turn on the monitors, a puzzle to use the monitors, a puzzle to use the computer programs. That's a lot of puzzles. And I actually skipped the puzzle. There's a puzzle of powering on the computer monitors. I totally skipped that one. Sorry about that. Nancy walked out of the security room and went straight to the locked door to the laboratory. She used her newly made keycard on the lab door, and it opened. She did a sliding dance into the lab while singing a little victory song about awesome detectives who solve tile puzzles. Now, some of you readers may be wondering how Nancy was able to get into the lab without being caught. After all, Gray was supposed to be inside the laboratory at that very moment, checking up on the false alarm that Nancy tripped. Well, the answer is very simple. After checking the false alarm, Gray stopped off at the lounge in order to eat some chips. So that's where he was. Nancy was awed the instant she stepped into the scientific lab. It was the lab of science! She stepped forward to the table in the middle. It was a science table! Sure, it was covered in disorganized junk, but it was science junk! Reaching out her hand, Nancy stole a beaker and a book on chemical solutions. Borrowed. She borrowed a beaker and a book on chemical solutions. Also inside the lab, Nancy found a 3D printer, weird electrical things, an area for mixing chemicals, weird electrical things, a broken musical Tesla coil, weird electrical things, and an oscillator. All of these things practically oozed science, and Nancy was understandably impressed. There were 2 side rooms going off of the main lab. One was a photolithography lab with a locked cabinet and a photolithography machine. Nancy didn't know how to spell photolithography, much less what it was, so she left the machine alone for now. The other side room was the Tesla coil room, where Niko was killed. The door to the control room was locked with some sort of puzzle. Meanwhile, the large Tesla coil was broken. Not only was it missing a part, but the capacitors board was completely devoid of capacitors. That's weird, Nancy said. The large Tesla coil was working perfectly earlier tonight when Ellie tested it for me in Chapter 8. I wonder what happened. Chapter 13, Robbing Ellie. Nancy left the science laboratory a little disappointed that she had found no clues whatsoever concerning Niko's death. As she stepped out into the main hall, she heard a weird humming noise. Uh-oh, Nancy said. Ellie might want to know about this. Wondering where that idea had come from, Nancy took the slow elevator of slowness upstairs. She went to the cubicles area and made a beeline for Ellie. Hey, Ellie? Nancy asked. The equipment right outside the lab is humming loudly. Is that a good sign? Nope, Ellie said. She immediately got out of her chair and ran out of the room. Nancy took a moment to hope that the laboratory wasn't about to explode. Then she started to explore Ellie's area. The desk drawers were all locked, except for one on the left. Inside was a memory card labeled Audio Diary, along with a key and a piece of paper that mentioned the control panel password. Nancy took all of these things, confident that Ellie wouldn't notice their absence. On Ellie's desk was a copy of A Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Court. Hidden in the middle of the book was a post-it note, which said Ellie's ID number. It also said that her phone was unlocked by 15, whatever that meant. Ellie's computer only had one program on it, which was a mess of computer code that Nancy couldn't decipher. She wondered how Ellie and everyone else in the lab was able to work all the time, considering the fact that none of their computers had email or internet access. The background of Ellie's computer was an old house in Savannah, Georgia, a location which Nancy would coincidentally visit in the next game. Either Ellie was a time-traveling southerner, a programmer who could see into the future, or it was just a coincidence. On the right side of Ellie's desk, Nancy found a box of capacitors. Just what I need to fix the Tesla coil, Nancy said. With the capacitors in hand, Nancy left Ellie's area and went downstairs to the lab. Now, some of you readers may be wondering how Nancy was able to get into the lab without being caught. After all, Ellie was supposed to be outside the lab at that very moment, working on the humming machines. Well, the answer is very simple. After fixing the machines, Ellie stopped off at the lounge in order to eat some chips. So that's where she was. Inside the lab, Nancy used her recently stolen key to open the locked cabinet in the photolithography lab. The cabinet was filled with silicon waffles. Nancy eagerly unwrapped one and took a bite. This hurt her teeth, and she spit it out in disgust. Taking a closer look at the packet, she saw that it was a silicon wafer, not a silicon waffle. She laughed at the misunderstanding. Nancy then went to the Tesla coil lab, pulling out the capacitors board. Nancy dumped the capacitors onto it. Ryan's note in the book should tell me how to do this, she said. Nancy then shook her head. Her habit of saying random things out loud was starting to get worse. Ryan's note in the book said that the capacitors had to have different colors in all 7 rows and columns, sort of like a Sudoku puzzle. Nancy turned the grid sideways and made a pretty rainbow of colors, with the red pieces filling the main diagonal. By great luck, this was one of the acceptable solutions. Nancy smiled and put the board back in place. The Tesla coil was halfway fixed. All she had to do now was replace the missing piece. She went up the stairs to the control room, where she used Ellie's paper about the control room password to open the door. The control room wasn't too interesting. There was a small notebook filled with Ellie's notes. Among the notes were a warning not to play with the Tesla coil, because it was a deadly device. Nancy skipped the warning and went straight to the part on how to activate the machine. "Here we go," Nancy said. She hit the power button and flipped all the switches. She could hear sounds, but nothing happened. "The device isn't working. I wonder what's wrong," Nancy said, even though she knew what was wrong with the Tesla coil. "What are you doing?" a gruff voice asked. "Get out!" Nancy turned to see an angry Gray Courtright looking at her. She was surprised that he was able to get all the way from his security room to the Tesla coil lab in the 3 seconds since she turned on the Tesla coil. As Gray forcibly led her out of the laboratory, he lectured her. "That device is deadly! You could have been killed! What idiot decided to let a teenager run loose in the laboratory here? Do you want to change your name from Nancy Drew to Nancy Dead? The device in that room is a deadly one!" Shortly after Gray's lecture, Nancy got an angry phone call from her boss, Victor Lossett. "What were you doing in the lab? I told you to stay out!" "But I'm a detective," Nancy said. "How can I solve the crime if I'm not allowed to visit the crime scene?" "If you keep poking around in there, you're going to end up fired or dead. The Tesla coil is deadly, Nancy. Stay out of the lab!" Victor hung up angrily, and Nancy scratched her head. Could it be that the Tesla coil is a deadly device? She wondered. That Nancy Drew, she is so smart. And those angry old guys using their angry old guy voices, it's really hurting my throat. Chapter 14, Deirdre Shannon calls. Gray liked to call himself the head of security at Lossett Labs, even though he knew the title was completely fake. He wasn't the head security guard, he was the only security guard. And to be honest, he was pretty bad at his job. For example, when he discovered that Nancy broke into the off-limits laboratory, he did nothing. That's right, he didn't ask her how she broke into the lab, which would have been good to know. He didn't bother to take away her keycard to the lab, which left her free to re-enter whenever she wanted. All he did was add her to the list of people he hated. Or at least he tried to. Gray was so distracted with thoughts of binary code that he accidentally added Nancy to his Christmas card list instead. Speaking of Nancy, she had made a lot of progress with the mystery. 13 chapters of progress, to be exact. She decided that was enough work for her day in Colorado. Yeah, she's still on her first day of investigation. Technically nighttime now. Nancy yawned and headed for the lounge for a late-night snack. She opened up the cupboard and pulled out a bag which was surprisingly empty. "Hey, who ate all of my chips?" Nancy asked. Frowning slightly, she decided to skip eating and go directly to bed. The next morning, after she woke up, she got a phone call from Deirdre Shannon. Why is she calling me? Nancy wondered. The last time she checked, Deirdre didn't like her. In fact, the last time the two talked, Deirdre had dumped a bowl of guacamole upside down on Nancy's head. "Hey there, Nancy Drew," Deirdre said. "Are you in Colorado by any chance?" How did you know?" Deirdre smirked. Pretty much everyone knew Nancy was in Colorado. After all, Nancy's last tweet had been, "Arrived in Colorado, solving a mystery about deadly devices." But Deirdre didn't need Twitter to follow the unimportant minutiae of Nancy's life. You can tell the story was written over 5 years ago because of all those Twitter references. Twitter's not a thing anymore. I should really update this chapter. Deirdre didn't need Twitter to follow the unimportant minutiae of Nancy's life because Deirdre was personally connected to the case. "Victor Lossett is a friend of my dad's," Deirdre said. "Last week he asked me for a reference for you." "And you gave him a good review?" Nancy asked. She had no idea she owed her current job to Deirdre. That's uncharacteristically nice of you. It was? Well, whatever. Don't get used to it. Wait, aren't you taking some kind of criminal detective class that gives you total access to police records? Nancy asked. Yeah, so? Deirdre said. So, that's a huge coincidence, which is super convenient for me, Nancy said. Since the police in Colorado routinely open up their murder investigations to college students in other states, you can get some information for me. Did you forget that I don't like you? Deirdre sighed. No, but it could help you with your class, and maybe someday I could return the favor. Oh gee, a vague promise with the word someday attached to it. Sounds too tempting to ignore, yet here I go. Deirdre hung up, leaving Nancy to wonder why she bothered calling in the first place. Chapter 15, Niko's audio player. For a high-tech facility, Lossett Labs sure had a lot of things that were broken. These included the audio player, the stove, the Tesla coil, and the musical Tesla coil. Since Ryan was the only employee who actually knew how to fix things, Nancy had to take the slow elevator of slowness upstairs to get Ryan's help. Hey, what's up? Ryan asked. I stole this memory card from Ellie, who stole it from Niko, Nancy said. Despite the fact that I am a teenager living in 2012, I have no idea how to use it. Can you help me? Sure, Ryan said. To use a memory card, all you have to do is stick it into the memory card slot on your laptop. I left my laptop at home, Nancy said. I guess you could also use the media player in Niko's office, Ryan said. It's broken, but I can fix it for you, if you do me a favor. Nancy groaned. It looked like, once again, she would be forced to do someone else's chores. What? Get me a Cocoa Mallow bar from the candy machine in Niko's office? Ryan said. She handed a brightly colored plastic device to Nancy. Here, you'll need this to unlock it. Can't you, I don't know, get the candy bar yourself? Nancy asked. Like, you could go to Niko's office and get the candy at the same time you fix the media player. Ryan scowled, and her voice went low. I want my candy, Nancy. Okay, Nancy said. She grabbed the non-deadly device and went back downstairs on the slow elevator of slowness. She went to Niko's office, where several pieces of candy were inside a glass display case. A hollowed-out area was in front of the case. Nancy said, examining the hollowed-out space. It was roughly the same size and shape of the plastic controller she was holding. How do I use this thing to open the case? Struck by sudden inspiration, Nancy threw the plastic device at the case as hard as she could. The glass shattered into pieces, allowing her to reach inside and get the candy. She got the candy bar Ryan asked for, then took another trip on the slow elevator of slowness to Ryan's lab. Here's the candy you wanted, Nancy said. Great, Ryan said. I guess you want to know about Niko's audio player now, huh? Nancy nodded. Can you fix it for me? Sure can, Ryan said. On the top of the machine on the left side, you'll see a switch which is labeled on, off. Flip the switch from off to on, and you can use it. Oh, wow, Nancy said, impressed by Ryan's technical prowess. Thanks! Enjoy the candy. Nancy took the slow elevator of slowness for the 4th trip in under 10 minutes. She turned on Niko's media player, which could only play audio files. There were 4 files on the memory card, and Nancy played them all. Number 1. This is Niko Jovic. I am confirming my identity, even though there is no reason for me to do so because I'm making these notes for personal use. Number 2. I wish to talk about Mason in a manner which is vague, yet makes it seem like he is guilty of some wrongdoing. Number 3. I've been working very hard on my electrical experiments. These experiments are so important that they're worth killing me for, but they're not important enough for me to describe them in detail. Number 4. Ryan
Ryan left another threatening note for me today, and after that she confronted me in my office and handed me another threat. At this point, I've received so many threatening notes from her that I've made a threat scrapbook. It's by the couch in the lounge, in case I get killed and a detective needs evidence to make Ryan look guilty.
Chapter 16, Ryan's Threats. Nancy went to the lounge where she found the conspicuous threat scrapbook, which the police somehow overlooked. Nancy picked up this plot device and flipped through the pieces of paper. They were all written in Ryan's handwriting, and they all came on Ryan's gummy bear notepaper. Unless you're dying to see the inside of a body bag, I suggest you rethink your plans. You're smart enough to know what's going to happen if you don't stop. Niko, consider what I'm saying. If you run the coil in that configuration, it's going to kill you. For the last time, no. My favorite band is not the Grateful Dead. The gummy bear notepaper somewhat detracted from the seriousness of the notes, and Nancy wasn't sure if she should take them as warnings or death threats. The final note was the most important one in the whole group. Grocery list: milk, gummy bears, tapioca. Frowning slightly, Nancy turned the paper over to the other side. On the night of the 24th, I'm going to be receiving an award for the Visionaries of Science Conference. They know I'm smart enough to be trusted. Do you? Wow, Nancy said. That particular note was oddly specific about Ryan's plans on the night of the 24th, which was the night Niko died. If this note was correct, Ryan just gave herself an extremely concrete alibi. What a curious thing to mention when you're trying to threaten someone. Nancy took the slow elevator of slowness back upstairs to Ryan's lab. As usual, Ryan was huddled over a desk working on some mechanical parts. Nancy wasn't sure what Ryan was working on, given the fact that the desk was always empty whenever Ryan stepped away from it. Hey Ryan, Nancy said. The large Tesla coil isn't working because it's missing a part. Do you know where it is? No, but I've got the schematic somewhere, Ryan said. She rummaged through a drawer until she found what she was looking for. Here it is. Great, thank you, Nancy said. She was about to add a sarcastic comment about how she had no idea what to do with the schematics, seeing as she was a teenager, not someone with a degree in mechanical engineering. Ryan spoke before Nancy could say anything, though. You're welcome, Ryan said. Need anything else? Nancy reached into her bag of evidence and pulled out the threats. I found these notes in the lounge. Did you write them? Yes, Ryan said. Nancy dramatically pointed her finger at Ryan. So you admit that you threatened Niko? No, those aren't threats. They're warnings. Niko wanted me to build something which could kill him. You sent Niko 5 warnings which talk about death and dying? Nancy asked. And he died shortly afterwards? I didn't kill him, Ryan said. I just have really bad timing, okay? Uh-huh, Nancy said. Can you prove that these aren't death threats? You know what? I need you to leave me alone right now, Ryan said. Please? Nancy didn't want to leave when she was so close to cornering a suspect, but please was the magic word, so she had to leave Ryan's lab. Questions swirled around Nancy's head as she walked back to the slow elevator of slowness. Who really killed Niko? Were Ryan's threats proof of her guilt? And why did Ryan always wear goggles on her head instead of over her eyes? This mystery was getting mysterious. Chapter 17. Nancy's new mystery buddy. Mason's computer was the only one in the entire laboratory which could be used to build machine parts, because it was the only one connected to the lab's 3D printer. So Nancy went over to talk to him. Hi, Mason. How's it going? She asked. Mason pointed to one of his paper clips, which Nancy had touched while investigating the night before. Someone moved my things, he said in a dark tone. Someone will pay. It's just a paper clip, Nancy said. Someone will pay, Mason said. They will suffer the wrath of Mason Quinto. That's great, Nancy said. Can I borrow your computer for a sec? I need to make something with the 3D printer. No, you cannot use my workstation for personal purposes, Mason said. It's an expensive piece of technology, and we can't have teenagers playing around with it. Besides, it's the only printer we have here. We're not supposed to use it unless it's absolutely necessary. What if I got you a Cocoa Kringle bar from Niko's office? Nancy asked. Out! Out! Mason said, forcing Nancy out of his cubicle. She groaned, but she wasn't willing to give up. If Mason wouldn't let her use the computer, she'd just come back at nighttime when Mason wasn't around. Then she'd use his computer. While Nancy waited 6 hours for Mason's work shift to end, she called her friends and played around on her phone. Around 2 p.m., Nancy got a second phone call from Deirdre Shannon. Hey there, Nancy Drew. How's my favorite buddy? What do you want, Deirdre? I want to help you, Nancy Drew. I want to be your girl on the inside of the world of crime solving. What? Okay, I got caught paying someone else to write my essays for me, Deirdre sighed. Apparently, the person who teaches crime-solving classes is good at detecting falsified documents. Who knew? So, to bring my grade back up, I'm gonna have to get extra credit by helping in a real-life investigation. Namely, yours. So, you're helping me because otherwise you'll get kicked out of school for plagiarism? I wouldn't say I'm a plagiarist, Deirdre said. I fully compensated the girl who wrote my essay. Besides, when she turned it in for her creative writing class, she got an A+. So I like to think of it as helping my fellow students. Right, Nancy said. Well, if you want to help me out, you can help me figure out Ryan Kilpatrick's alibi. She says she was accepting an award at the Visionaries of Science conference on the night of the murder. Can you verify that? Pretty sure the police probably looked into it already, but okay, Deirdre said. Anything else, Miss Detective? I've got the surveillance video from the night of the murder, but I think it's been tampered with, Nancy said. It only shows Niko going into the lab. So either he was killed remotely, or the killer went into the lab that night, but later removed themselves from the video, Deirdre said. I broke into the lab yesterday and used the Tesla coil, Nancy said. In order to activate the machine, you have to push a button and flip 3 separate switches. I'm pretty sure it wasn't done remotely. You used the Tesla coil? Deirdre asked. Yeah, why? Even though it killed someone? Deirdre asked. Even though you have no experience with electrical engineering? You decided to start playing around with it when no one else was there? It seemed like a good idea at the time, Nancy said. Deirdre sighed. I have no idea how you manage to solve so many mysteries without killing yourself, Nancy. Anyway, if you're right about the machine, then the killer tampered with the surveillance video. So, just look for someone who's smart enough to hack into a computer and edit a video while making it look untouched. That would be everyone in this facility, Nancy said. Including me. It took me less than 10 minutes to figure out Gray's computer passwords and get onto the system where he keeps the surveillance videos. Really? Deirdre asked. For a high-tech lab with its own security team, that place doesn't sound very secure. Of course, I already knew that because someone was killed there, but still. Don't worry, mystery buddy, Nancy said. With the 2 of us on the case, the killer will be caught in no time. Don't call me your mystery buddy. Okay? Bye! Chapter 18, The 3D Printer. Once Mason was gone, Nancy swooped into his cubicle. The first thing she did was move one of his paper clips, just because. And then she logged onto his computer. She opened up the program for creating devices, and a simple 3x4 square grid appeared. So I just need to use Ryan's schematics to figure out which squares to make, Nancy said. Easy. Then she noticed the grid had 4 layers that went upwards, because the device was in 3D. Wiggity waggity what? Nancy shouted. The 3D printer prints in 3 dimensions? True. All Nancy could do was make a device with simple blocks, but it was still tricky to visualize what the 3D device would look like, especially considering that the schematics had pictures of the device from 4 different angles. Why didn't the schematics simply list the locations of blocks on the grid like the computer program did? Nancy didn't know. After going through every single piece and double-checking from all 4 angles, Nancy thought she was finished. She pressed the print button. Nothing happened. I must have made a mistake somewhere, Nancy said. She deleted one of the boxes she was unsure about, then tried again. No result. Nancy groaned in frustration, then started going through the entire puzzle again. After adding a mystery box, which was only half visible from one of the angles, she pressed the print button again. This time she automatically said, "There, that looks right." Nancy smiled. Sometimes her habit of saying when a puzzle was finished was extremely useful. She had a feeling that it was related to her weird habit of explaining how to solve puzzles. Or maybe it was just an extra clue they added to help players on amateur sleuth mode? Nancy wasn't sure. One trip on the slow elevator of slowness later, and Nancy went to the lab of science! The 3D printer was just to the right of the main doors. Nancy selected her device on the touchscreen, then told the machine to print. A hum came from the machine as it started working. "Currently printing. Estimated finish time, 10 hours. Appeared on the screen. "Waggity wiggity what?" Nancy shouted. "I can't wait that long. I've already waited 7 hours today so I could use Mason's computer." But there was nothing for it. Nancy desperately needed the piece to fit for the Tesla coil, so she had to wait for the 3D printer to finish. If she had made an inventory of all the work she did that day, it would have looked something like this. Time spent getting candy from Ryan, 4 minutes. Time spent waiting to use Mason's computer, 7 hours. Time spent on 3D puzzle, 20 minutes. Yeah, time spent on the slow elevator of slowness, 7 hours. Time spent waiting for printer, 10 hours. Time spent actually solving the mystery, 1 minute. Eventually the printer was done. Nancy removed the piece and put it inside the Tesla coil. And that was it! The Tesla coil was finally fixed! Now Nancy could use it at any time in order to... Wait, why did I want to fix the broken Tesla coil again? Nancy wondered. Chapter 19, the circuit board. Fixing the broken Tesla coil was actually part of Ellie's job description. Maybe Nancy was so used to doing other people's chores for them that she was now doing their chores without being asked. Anyway, it was now daytime. Nancy's task list said she needed to fix the musical Tesla coil for completely legitimate reasons dealing with the mystery. That, and she thought it would be really cool to play around with. So Nancy went back upstairs on the slow elevator of slowness and into Ryan's lab. "Ryan, do you know how to fix the musical Tesla coil?" Nancy asked. "The circuit board is shot. You'll have to make a new one," Ryan said. "You seem like you know what's up. I bet you can make a new one yourself. Just check the computer in the photolithography lab." "Yeah, but it's your job to fix things here," Nancy said. I stopped caring about my job a few days ago," Ryan admitted. "I'm probably going to get fired by Victor because he wants to make it look like he did something about Niko's death. I mean, you saw those notes I wrote. I'm basically the main suspect." Nancy paused. Unlike the other employees, at least Ryan was being honest about the fact that she wasn't doing much work. "You seem remarkably calm about being accused of murder," Nancy said. "That's because I'm innocent," Ryan said. "Worst possible scenario, I get used as a scapegoat. If that happens, I'll just move to Boise with my motorcycle buddies. No biggie." Nancy shrugged as she left the lab and went back downstairs. The circuit board puzzle was already loaded on the computer in the photolithography lab. Nancy had seen puzzles like these before. Yeah, and Nancy drew Alibi in Ashes. All she had to do was rotate the various pieces so all the connections were made. After 6 minutes, the schematics for the circuit board were done, then they printed out on a small printer nearby. "I thought Mason said this place didn't have any printers," Nancy thought. "Oh well, no big deal. I just need to put this in the musical coil and..." Obviously, putting a piece of paper into an electrical machine wouldn't work. She needed to use a wafer, with the circuit board schematics etched onto it. And in order to do that, she needed to use the photolithography machine. "Okay, no big deal," Nancy said. Picking up a nearby book on photolithography machines, she flipped open to the operating instructions. There were 4 steps. "Step 1, turn on the machine," Nancy read. She pressed the red power button. Check. "Step 2, insert the silicon wafer." Nancy took a silicon wafer from the cabinet and put it in the open slot on the machine. Check. "Step 3, insert the design to be etched on the wafer." I guess that means the schematics I just printed out. Nancy put them onto the second open slot on the machine. Check. Step 4. Insert the super magical etching solution made from explosive chemicals which could easily kill me, Nancy said. She paused as she rifled through her pockets. Oh no! I don't have that! Chapter 20. Mixing chemicals. The extremely explosive chemicals were in the corner of the lab, to the left of the main door as you walked inside. As she looked at it, Nancy had memories of the chemicals challenge she solved near the end of her investigation at Castle Malloy. Okay, hydrogen goes into section 1. Kaboom! Second chance? Yes. Then I guess hydrogen goes into section 2. Kaboom! Second chance? Yes. Section 3? Kaboom! Second chance? Yes. Well, where am I supposed to put this thing of hydrogen? Kaboom! Second chance? Yes. Well, come on, I shouldn't have died there. I didn't even touch anything. Kaboom! Second chance? Yes. Hopefully this time I won't die as easily, Nancy said. She brushed her hand against a vial of water. Kaboom! Second chance? Yes. Ah! Nancy screamed. After flipping through the chemical solutions book that she borrowed, Nancy was able to determine that she needed hydrogen fluoride. This was kept in one of the nearby cabinets. The cabinet with various chemical solutions was locked, unlike, the door to the room where the murder took place. After solving the puzzle lock, Nancy took a bottle of HF and placed it onto the chemicals work area. A magical chart on the left automatically kept track of how many chemicals she had poured into the flask. For example, when she poured 4 milliliters of H2O into the flask, the number 4 appeared onto the chart. Whoa, Nancy said. The chemical solution that Nancy needed was made up of 3 milliliters of hydrogen fluoride, 1 milliliter of nitric acid, and 4 milliliters of water. The two beakers here were 3 milliliters and 4 milliliters respectively, so it was rather simple to get the hydrogen fluoride and the water into place. But how could Nancy get only 1 milliliter of nitric acid? She'd have to measure out the 4 milliliter of nitric acid, then pour it into the 3 milliliter beaker, throw that away, get the remaining beakers of nitric acid, and... Wait, I'm overthinking this, Nancy thought. She easily poured out 1 milliliter of nitric acid into a beaker, instead of filling the beaker all the way up to the top. With that done, she was easily able to finish the solution and bottle it. Nancy returned to the photolithography lab, poured the solution inside, and started the machine. According to the book, it would take about half a day to finish, so Nancy left the lab. She decided not to return the book on chemical solutions, just in case she'd need it again. Chapter 21, Phone Calls. Nancy waited until nighttime when the photolithography machine would finish etching the circuit board. Nancy wasn't sure why it took so long. Whenever she etched things on her Etch-a-Sketch, it didn't take half a day. While she waited, Nancy got a phone call from her enemy-turned-mystery buddy, Deirdre Shannon. Nancy, Ryan's alibi holds up, Deirdre said. She couldn't have killed Niko. Because she was at the conference thing, right? Right. The police didn't accept her alibi because it wasn't airtight. There's a 15-minute range between the end of the conference and Niko's death. But I did some digging around with the freelance journalists who covered the conference. There were about 10 pictures of Ryan taken after the event. And this establishes her alibi because Ryan was standing near a visible clock, Nancy said excitedly. No, of course not, Deirdre said. A visible clock? Are you crazy? That's a ridiculous plot device. Need I remind you she could have easily set the clock forward a half hour to make a fake alibi? Oh, Nancy said. Well, how did the photographs of Ryan prove anything? You don't know anything about photography, do you? Photographs have timestamps. Digital photographs have timestamps going down to the millisecond. The 3 photographers were able to confirm that she stayed for around 10 minutes after the conference ended. She didn't have enough time to kill Niko. Great, you've been a big help, Nancy said. Thank you. That is a genuine compliment, Deirdre said. She was unused to hearing those. Anyway, I already gave this info to the police. If this doesn't bring up my grade, nothing will. After Deirdre hung up, Nancy called Victor Lossett. Hey, boss. Big news about the investigation. You managed to prove that Ryan is guilty? Victor asked. Just the opposite, Nancy said. I've got proof that she's innocent. What? Victor shouted. Yeah, Deirdre found timestamped photographs of Ryan at the science convention thingy. She sent them to the police. Arrgh! Victor said angrily. But that means they'll reopen the case, and everything will get stalled out again. Okay, Nancy said. Victor seemed overly upset about the fact that she had made actual progress. What's my next move, then? I don't know. I have to think, Victor said. Maybe I could investigate the other suspects? Nancy suggested. Well, who's your prime suspect now? If Ryan's innocent, the culprit has to be either Gray, Mason, or Ellie, Nancy said. The only other employees with access to the labs are you and Niko and... Hey, what if his death was a suicide? Focus on Mason, Victor said. Niko suspected that Mason was secretly stealing his work. Yeah, Niko mentioned that on his audio diary that I found. Find the other audio diaries. Maybe they will give you more information, Victor said. Now that I think about it, Mason has always seemed suspicious to me. Gray and I are celebrating No Shave November this year, and Mason refused to participate. I don't know why. Maybe he's hiding a clue in his beard, and he doesn't want anyone to see it. Beards don't work like that, Nancy, Victor said. Either way, Mason is now your top suspect. Make sure to investigate him. Aye, aye, boss man. Chapter 22, Escape Through the Vents. Once the circuit board was done, Nancy put it in the musical Tesla coil. She played around with it for a bit before going to sleep that night. The next day, Nancy went upstairs on the slow elevator of slowness. She planned to investigate Mason, who was her prime suspect at this point. First, she wanted to see Ryan and tell her the good news. What's up? Ryan asked. I heard the police found a way to prove your alibi, Nancy said. You really are innocent. I'm sorry I ever doubted you. That's okay. Anyone else who read my notes probably would have come to the same conclusion you did, Ryan said. Hey, I have to ask. You're not really here for a new investor, are you? You're here to look into what happened to Niko. Me? An undercover detective? Nancy asked. What gives you that idea? I googled your name. Oh. Yeah. Nancy shrugged. Okay, you caught me. I'm an undercover detective. Great, Ryan said. I promise to help your investigation in any way I can. I want Niko's killer caught just as much as everyone else. Who do you think did it? Nancy asked. Gray. He was here on the night of the murder, and he has access to the security camera videos, Ryan said. That's means and opportunity, but I have no idea what his motive would be. Niko was Gray's best friend. Or as close as Gray could get to having a best friend. Could you prove this? Nancy asked. Did they have matching BFF bracelets or something? Gray was Niko's only Facebook friend, Ryan said. I tried adding him, but he turned down my request. That's pretty solid evidence, Nancy agreed. Facebook was obviously the most valid form of evidence that could be used in a court of law, which is why people changing their Facebook profile pictures can determine the outcome of Supreme Court decisions. Since it was impossible to disprove such good evidence, Nancy left Ryan's lab and walked down the hall. She didn't pay much attention to what was going on around her, because she was busy checking her cell phone for text messages. That's why Nancy completely missed it when the model Tesla coil fell off of the wall and smacked her in the head. That's a deadly device, Nancy groaned, before collapsing unconscious. As she fell to the ground, her phone slipped out of her hand and the screen cracked. She ended up having to pay a ton of money to get it replaced, because the phone company didn't accept knocked unconscious by Tesla coil as a good explanation for damages. She woke up 12 hours later in the photolithography lab. Apparently, the culprit who knocked her out was able to carry her body downstairs and into the lab without arousing any sort of suspicion. Nancy shaking her head, she got off the ground and tried the door handle. It's locked, Nancy said. Maybe the key is hidden somewhere in this room. That's when she noticed the oxygen meter in the upper right corner of the screen. It was dropping quickly. Oh no, 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 Nancy cried, not good. Nancy had no idea why a photolithography lab would be designed so that all the room's oxygen could be removed. But there was no time to worry about that deadly plot device. She needed to find a quick escape. With the door locked, the only way out was through the vent system, Nancy cried. I saw a detective do this in a movie once. She jumped to the low-hanging vent and smacked her forehead against it. Rubbing her head, she moved a chair underneath the vent, then climbed on top of it and into the large metallic tubes. It was incredibly hot in the vents. If I don't get out of here soon, I'm going to fry, Nancy said, like, a fry in a fryer. This wasn't the smartest thing Nancy ever said, but in her defense, she was only about 2 minutes away from death. She started crawling through the vents, which were a confusing maze. She followed along the right-hand edge of the maze until she found a grate below her. Luckily, this grate led to the main hallway. Conveniently, Chapter 23, The Shredder. Conveniently, Nancy was in the right place at the right time to overhear an off-screen argument between Mason and Gray.
What are you doing here?
Back off, old man.
I said, what are you doing here? And while we're at it, what's in the bag?
There was the sound of a minor scuffle. Hey, let go! This is mine! Mason said, struggling for control of the bag.
I don't want to see you here screwing around after hours. Now get out!
Are you crazy? Get your hands off my stuff! There was the sound of running footsteps.
Yeah, you'd better run,
Gray said. Then he sighed as he walked away.
I should have chased him. Man, I gotta lose some weight.
Nancy waited for Gray to be gone, then she kicked the grating off of the vent. Obviously, she could do this because the grating wasn't bolted on or held in place by screws or anything like that. Nancy went to the security office. Outside the door, she could hear Gray shredding something. This gave her cause to step inside the office and confront him. "Stop right there, Shredder!" she said in her best Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles impersonation.
What?
Gray said. "You're shredding something," Nancy said. "What is it?"
Paper.
"What's on the paper?" Nancy asked.
Nothing. It doesn't concern you. Forget it.
"Did you take that paper from Mason?"
That smarmy little punk shouldn't be taking things from the lab without permission,
Gray said, slamming his hand against his armrest.
If he tries that again, I'm reporting it to Victor.
Uh-huh, Nancy said. "Since you're the security guy, I have a security report for you."
Yeah?
"Someone knocked me unconscious with the Tesla coil model upstairs," Nancy said. "He or she dragged me downstairs to the photolithography lab, locked me inside, then turned off the oxygen."
How'd you get out?
Gray asked. "Through the vent system."
Huh. Smart. Most wouldn't have thought of that,
Gray said, stroking his beard thoughtfully. He stopped there. "Well, aren't you going to write a report?" Nancy demanded.
Hey, that lab is dangerous. You're not supposed to be in there.
"I didn't choose to get locked inside the photolithography lab," Nancy said. "Anyway, shouldn't you, go unlock the door or something?"
Yeah, I guess you're right,
Gray said. He got up out of his chair, which was a process that took him 40 seconds.
Don't mess with my stuff while I'm gone.
Gray rudely pushed his way past Nancy. "Don't mess with my stuff while I'm gone," Nancy mocked. She immediately went to the shredder and pulled it open. She stuffed the paper into her pocket, intending to put the paper back together later. There was a red button by the shredder, not attached to anything. Nancy picked it up and examined it. The words Tesla coil, kill switch were printed on the side in small letters. "Aha," Nancy said. "I bet the murderer used this button to put the Tesla coil on kill mode. But why does Gray have it?" Nancy also found a small knob by the card reader. The knob will become important later, I promise. Chapter 24, The Book Challenge. Nancy did her awesome detective who just got evidence dance. Then she took the slow elevator of slowness upstairs. She wanted to see Ellie, but Ellie wasn't there. On Ellie's desk was a piece of paper with Niko's handwriting. Nancy picked it up. The paper said to curl up with a good book, and it had a list of 7 books. Instead of listing the book titles, Nikola wrote down... Oh, his name is not Niko, I guess Niko could be short for Nikola. Anyway, Niko wrote down clues to the books, such as element number 74 and Nikola Tesla's best friend. Great, he left a scavenger hunt behind, Nancy said. Somehow she wasn't surprised. In the other part of the offices, Nancy found a mystery ID card, and she found Ellie's phone. There were a series of numbers on the phone, and suddenly Ellie's note of 15, 15, 15 made sense. All Nancy had to do was line up the numbers so all 4 rows of 3 equaled 15. It took a while, but Nancy eventually got all 9 numbers into place. For mysterious reasons unknown to Nancy, Ellie's phone did not have the ability to make phone calls. All it could do was send text messages to Mason. Based on the messages, the two of them were trying to find a buyer for something. Were they trying to sell some of Niko's electrical inventions? Or were they searching for an extra rare video game? Weird, Nancy said. I thought those two hated each other. She put the phone in her evidence box because obviously there was no way that Ellie would need this phone. The evidence box was getting quite full at this point. Nancy went downstairs to the lounge and she got to work on the puzzles. The first puzzle was fixing the shredded paper. She put the pieces on the work table and started moving them around like a jigsaw puzzle. The paper ended up having a design and a bunch of technobabble on it, but Nancy was able to understand one thing. There's a picture of 3 hooks with arrows around them under the words, "Put in the safekeeping." The second puzzle was Niko's list of books. Nancy was supposed to look up all the answers in the various books scattered throughout the lab, but her phone had internet access, so she got the answers through Google. It helped that some of the books had obviously fake names. The password to Larkspur Lane, the clue of the tapping heels, the whispering statue? Nancy asked. Niko must have made up these names so the books would fit the challenge. Nancy pulled the 7 books in the proper order. A nearby picture of Nikola Tesla swung backwards, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside was Niko's journal and another one of Niko's audio diaries. Those fake book names are Nancy Drew book names. That's the joke. Yeah, I find it weird. I had a typo where I accidentally put down Nikola instead of Niko. I'm like 90% sure that's where they came up with the name for Niko. It's just short for Nikola, and that's why he's such a big Tesla fan. They've got the same first name. Chapter 25. Pretty incriminating evidence. Niko's journal had a large 2-part diagram with a lot of letters. The bottom half of the diagram matched up numbers with a series of 4 squares. Nancy instantly recognized it as a binary code puzzle. She took the slow elevator of slowness upstairs again so she could look at the binary chart. The chart showed how each number could correspond to a series of 4 squares using 2 colors. Using this as a guide, Nancy crossed off all the blue squares on the chart, leaving the red squares untouched. So Nancy's actually solving puzzles legitimately in this story? Wow. It turned out that the puzzle needed her to cross out the red squares while leaving the blue squares intact. Yeah, how are you supposed to know that? It's like a 50-50 chance, come on. Nancy groaned in frustration and redid the puzzle. The solution was play every 5th letter above on the coil. This gave her a series of musical notes, which she played on the musical Tesla coil. A nearby wall panel opened up when she was finished. So, Niko left a coded message leading to a hidden alcove, which had a coded message leading to a hidden alcove, Nancy said. She sighed and picked up the note in the alcove, which was another Niko Jovic original. Niko wrote that secrets would be found if someone used a black light under the glow. Nancy wasn't sure what that meant. Nancy left the lab and returned to the security room. Gray wasn't there because he left to go get some McDonald's. That was convenient because it allowed Nancy to solve the coat rack puzzle. She turned the handles on the coat rack according to the shredded piece of paper. This opened up the top of the coat rack, which had a series of angry emails sent back and forth between Gray and Niko. Wow, this is pretty incriminating evidence, Nancy said. I wonder why Gray didn't put this through the shredder. There was also a copy of Gray's diploma in theoretical physics and a security video number. Nancy hopped on Gray's computer and used a card reader to check the mysterious ID card found in Mason and Ellie's area. It was the same card used on the night of the murder. Wow, this is pretty incriminating evidence, Nancy said. I wonder why Mason and Ellie left it out in the open. Nancy took a moment to wonder about these plot devices, then she shook her head and regained her focus. There was one more thing she needed to investigate, the video on Gray's computer. Nancy typed in the video number and pressed play. The video was of Gray and Niko at a karaoke bar, singing Cher's Do You Believe in Life After Love? I can feel something inside me say, I really don't think you're strong enough. Confused, Nancy double-checked the video number. It turned out that she switched the last two numbers accidentally. Typing the correct number in, Nancy saw the video of Niko's death. This was slightly different from the security video of Niko's death, which Nancy saw earlier. The video showed Niko entering the lab, then Gray exiting. After that, Niko was electrocuted. Wow, this is pretty incriminating evidence, Nancy said for the third time. But what's that super suspicious number in the lower right corner? It looks like some kind of plot device. Chapter 26, The Video Code. The next day, Nancy went to Niko's room and listened to his second audio diary. Just like last time, Niko left 4 notes. Number 1. I'm almost finished developing a new energy source. We'll be able to harness almost unlimited energy from cute pictures of cats on the internet. Victor's warned me not to take things too far. The economy works on expensive energy. If I unleash this new power source, it should cause a worldwide collapse. Number 2. Paranoid. I'm not paranoid. You're the paranoid one, audio diary. Number 3. I need to buy a new audio player. The memory cards for this machine only hold 2 minutes of audio, tops. Number 4. Ellie asked me how much the experiments would buy on the open market. That question is entirely inappropriate, and I put her in timeout for 15 minutes. If any detectives are wondering, Ellie's bad financial situation is a perfect motive for killing me. Nancy didn't think those audio notes were very helpful. She went upstairs on the slow elevator of slowness and went to Mason's area. He wasn't helpful because he was too busy complaining about the fact that someone moved his paper clips again. So Nancy went to see Ryan instead. Ryan, you're a computer expert, right? Nancy asked. No, I'm a mechanical engineer. I work with machines, not computers. Great! I need you to examine some weird computer code in the hidden video of Niko's death. Hidden video? Ryan asked. Her interest piqued. She followed Nancy downstairs to the security office. The security office must not have been too secure because the two women were able to break into it, even though it was locked. Nancy showed the video to Ryan. Instead of watching the video, Ryan started talking in gobbledygook about computer code. Obviously, the code signatures have been split into a real-time, past-time dynamic setup, measuring the current users while keeping a record of them for future reference. There's a break in the code here and here, where the 6th digit has been dropped from the number, which represents the file's time signature. Could you explain that in smaller, easier to understand words? Nancy asked. Someone edited themselves out of the video. You could tell because there's a time gap, Ryan said. Then she gasps. Oh no! What's this? A computer? Nancy guessed. No, the code. Look! Someone set it up so they get a message whenever a person looks at the video's code. In other words, the murderer knows we were watching the video with the code on. That's good, right? Nancy asked. We could trace the message and figure out who the murderer is that way. Pfft, forget that, Ryan said, dismissing the plot device out of hand. No, I think we should get out of here. If the murderer finds us here watching the video, we'll probably be the next victims. That's not good. Things are getting deadly for our heroes. Chapter 27, Security Alerts. Nancy left the security office and headed to the lounge. As she passed the slow elevator of slowness, an alarm sounded. A voice came over the speakers. Testing, testing. Hello? Hey, this thing makes my voice sound funny. Hello, hello. I feel like a musician. Should I sing in the microphone? Oh, say, can you hear? What do you mean you're recording? You said we were just testing it out, not recording. Ugh, fine, whatever. Security breach in Tesla Coil Lab. Security breach in Tesla Coil Lab. Happy now? You better cut out all this other stuff out of the finished audio file. Nancy recognized this as Niko's voice. Despite the fact that Nancy had broken into the lab multiple times at this point, this would be the only time in the game the security alarm for unwanted entry would sound. Gray only works at nighttime, so because it was daytime, there was no one around to investigate the security breach. That seemed like a major security oversight to Nancy, and she decided to investigate the problem by herself. Nancy went to the Tesla coil lab. Mason was behind the Tesla coil, crouched down. He was using chalk to write, "Mason was here," on the coil in large letters. "What are you doing here?" Mason asked. "I was going to ask you the same thing. This might come as a shock to you, but no one wants you lurking around here. Why don't you just leave me to my work?" "I'm not lurking, and you know, lurk rhymes with jerk, which is what you are." Another alarm sounded, and Niko's voice came over the speakers again. "Probably not going to see it. I don't care if it's gotten good reviews. I dislike movies in general, and that one... Oh, we're on? Right, warning. Security device has been activated. The machines will fill up with power and kill everyone in the lab. Have a nice day." "No!" Mason cried. He tried to walk away from the Tesla coil, but he couldn't because he didn't want to drop his piece of chalk. "You have to shut down the machine! Hurry!" Nancy wasn't sure what was happening. How could the Tesla coil be turned on from someplace other than the control room? She left the Tesla coil lab, hoping to find someone who knew what was going on, when she caught sight of the grid that she fixed in Chapter 7. Once again, the lights were in an erratic pattern. "Oh, I get it," Nancy said. "I need to flip all the switches to turn the power off again." She started flipping the switches randomly, and she was luckily able to turn off the machine in time. Mason came out of the Tesla coil lab. "Thank you. I appreciate that." The doors to the main lab opened, and in stepped an angry-looking bald man.
"What are you two doing here?"
"Victor!" Mason and Nancy gasped.
"Neither of you should have been granted access to the Tesla coil lab," Victor said. "We should talk. Niko's office. Now."
Uh-oh, they're in trouble. Chapter 28, Fired. Mason left Niko's office, muttering sadly about his pay cut and how it would affect his ability to purchase paper clips.
"Nancy, you're next," Victor's voice called.
In the actual game, we don't know if Mason got in trouble for what he did. I hope he did get in trouble messing around with the coil like that, but it sort of feels like he just left Nancy to get the blame for everything. Meanie. Nancy went into the office. Victor had made himself at home in Niko's chair, placing a small bowl of candy to his left and placing the key to Niko's display case on the right.
"Nice job. You saved me some paperwork back there. It's a shame we couldn't be meeting under more fortunate circumstances."
"What do you mean?"
"I mean you're fired, Nancy," Victor said. "You've been here for a week and you still haven't found the killer? Next time, I'm hiring a professional."
"But I've made progress," Nancy said. "I found Niko's audio diaries. Also, I fixed the musical Tesla coil. It had a note about..."
"As far as I can tell, all you've done is sneak into areas you're not allowed into. Like the lab, or the lab, or the lab," Victor said. "Turn over your lab keycard, Nancy."
Nancy reluctantly gave it up.
"Good. Now wait in the lounge until a ride comes to pick you up and take you to the airport. And please, don't touch anything."
"But what's going to happen with the case?" Nancy asked.
"Isn't it obvious? Next time I'm going to hire a professional detective, not an amateur sleuth."
Nancy's shoulders slumped as she left Niko's office. She was fired, and it looked like she was going home as soon as possible. To make matters worse, there was no second chance option for her to undo her big mistake. Nancy pulled out her phone, preparing to call her father and ask him to schedule a plane trip home. That's when she saw there was an emergency weather alert. "Warning, severe snowstorms in Colorado," Nancy read. "All flights at Denver International Airport have been canceled indefinitely. People are expected to be trapped indoors for the next week. All detectives are advised to continue their investigations." Nancy cheered. This conveniently timed snowstorm would allow her to continue her investigation. Sneaking around under Victor's nose wouldn't be easy, but Nancy was sure she could do it. She pulled out the piece of paper that Niko had hidden by the musical Tesla coil, and reread the part about using a black light under the glow. "You're my last clue, little note," Nancy said. "I hope you'll solve the mystery for me." Chapter 29, Finding the Hidden Lab. Nancy went upstairs on the slow elevator of slowness. Since Nancy had no more access to the outside world, Ryan was her only ally in the search for Niko's killer. No more access to the outside world? She could still call Deirdre. I don't know why I wrote that. "Did you hear?" Ryan asked. "A snowstorm of gloriously epic proportions is bearing down on us. I might get a chance to break out the snowmobiles. Or we'll get snowed in like last time." Nancy shook her head. The last time she had used a snowmobile was at Icicle Creek Lodge, where she chased after a culprit who had just tried to kill her. It hadn't been a very fun experience. "What's wrong?" Ryan asked, seeing the look on Nancy's face. "Victor just fired me," Nancy said. "He thinks I'm a bad detective because all I found is a clue about a blacklight." "A blacklight?" Ryan asked. She grabbed something from a nearby toolbox. "Do you mean this thing?" "Yes, that's it!" Nancy grabbed it excitedly. "I need to use it under a glow, like the glow that the Tesla coil produces on its low setting." "Okay, I have no idea what you're talking about," Ryan said. "Niko left a hidden message for me," Nancy said. "Well, not for me specifically, but he left a bunch of clues just in case he happened to be killed." "He was a pretty paranoid person," Ryan said. "I guess this means my next stop is the Tesla coil lab," Nancy said. "Only Victor took away my key card, so I can't go there anymore." "Here, take mine," Ryan said, handing her card to Nancy. "I don't really need it because I can get into the lab without an access card." Nancy nodded. She remembered that particular fact, which was surprisingly irrelevant to the murder mystery, because the murderer used a key card to access the lab. They might be a murderer, but they followed proper lab entry procedures. Nancy thanked Ryan for her help, then went downstairs to the lab. After setting the coil on low, she wandered around the lab, waving the blacklight around randomly. Nancy got bored after 27 seconds, so she decided to pretend that she was a Star Wars Jedi fighting evil monsters. She became so busy playing around and making cool sound effects that she almost missed seeing the writing on the hex. "Enter the hex." "This must be what Niko wants me to find," Nancy said. The writing was invisible unless the blacklight was close to it. She grabbed the hex and pulled. Amazingly, it lifted up, revealing a hidden passageway. "Whoa! Niko built a secret lab underneath the lab? How did he do that without anyone noticing?" Nancy wondered. She climbed down the ladder, went down the short tunnel, and looked at the door. It wouldn't open when she pulled the handle, so Nancy took a closer look at the small pad above the handle. "A biometric fingerprint scanner coded specifically to Niko's fingerprints?" Nancy asked. "How am I supposed to get past that?" Chapter 30, The Fingerprint Print. The door to Niko's hidden lab appeared to be made out of wood, but Nancy didn't have an axe handy, so she couldn't chop it down. She would probably have to construct a fingerprint from gelatin, as was explained in the conveniently located book in Mason's area. Nancy would need two things, a fingerprint and some gelatin. Niko probably left a fingerprint in his office, but Victor was currently occupying that area, so Nancy couldn't get in and search for prints. Gelatin would also be hard to find unless she melted down one of Ryan's gummy bears or something. So Nancy headed back upstairs. "Hey Ryan, I need some gummy bears," she said. "Oh no you don't," Ryan said. "These are my gummy bears." "But I need the gelatin." "Tell you what," Ryan said. "Victor is a sugar hoarder. If you can get some of his candy away from him, I'll trade the gummy bears for it." "How can I get Victor out of Niko's office?" "I have a high-pitched device which annoys him, and if..." "I know! I'll just sit outside his office all day and wait for him to leave so he can use the bathroom," Nancy said. "Great plan, Ryan!" "Yeah, it's a better plan than using this high-pitched, possibly deadly device." As it turned out, Ryan's plan was not so great. Victor was so possessive of his candy bowl that he took it with him whenever he left the room. Nancy searched for it frantically, but nothing was on the desk besides for a key. "The key to Niko's cabinet!" Nancy cried. She unlocked the cabinet, and lo and behold, large fingerprints were conveniently located on one of Niko's glass devices. Apparently, Niko dipped his hands in charcoal dust, then touched his glass case, but he never bothered to clean them off. Nancy figured Niko was a very messy person. Nancy quickly took a detour to the lounge area and grabbed some tape. She went back to Niko's office and made tape copies of his fingerprints, which were surprisingly clear. Based on the placing of the fingerprints and the fact that there was no thumbprint, he couldn't have been picking up the device or setting it down. It's almost like Niko touched the glass for no reason other than leaving a fingerprint behind. Either way, Nancy now had the print of the print. She just needed to find a way to get it onto gelatin, a task which would be almost as difficult as nailing gelatin to a wall. Chapter 31. Elevator Problems. Nancy stepped outside of Niko's office. She waited 3 minutes, then turned around and went back inside. Victor magically appeared in the office, even though Nancy never once saw him in the hallways. "Now is not a good time," Victor said in a grumpy voice. Presumably, he was upset because Nancy discovered his teleportation powers. "Can I have some of your candy?" Nancy asked. "What? Sure, take one." "Thanks," Nancy said. She took the entire bowl and left with it. "Hey, I meant one candy, not one bowl!" Victor cried. But Nancy didn't hear him. She took the candy bowl with her as she went to the photolithography lab. Luckily, Nancy remembered how to use the machine, so it wasn't too difficult for her to set up the proper chemicals and make a print of the fingerprint print. True, she accidentally spilled hydrofluoric acid on the doors of the glass cabinet, completely destroying them, but she decided that she would blame that on the killer. Nancy went upstairs on the slow elevator of slowness so she could trade Victor's candy for Ryan's gummy bears. She took the slow elevator of slowness back down to the first floor when disaster struck. The slow elevator of slowness soon became the slow elevator of doom. It gave a huge lurch and stopped midway between the floors. Nancy pulled open the control panel to see that the gears had fallen off. She needed to put the gears back into place to make the elevator start moving again. If she didn't finish quickly enough, the elevator would crash, killing her. "Not good!" Nancy cried. She started putting the big gears in first, but she accidentally dropped one. As she picked it up, the elevator lurched again. She didn't have enough time to solve the puzzle. It was a cruel irony after all the time Nancy had spent wishing the elevator would move faster. Nancy took a deep breath and tried to focus all of her brain power on the current puzzle. Sadly, the only thing that popped into Nancy's mind was the elevator scenes in Toy Story 2. Nancy shook her head and decided the best thing to do would be to escape. Now. Nancy looked for the elevator escape hatch in the ceiling. She could barely touch it if she jumped. Climbing up on one of the arm handles on the wall, Nancy was able to reach the escape hatch and push it open. Afterwards, Nancy would say that she used her natural athletic ability to propel herself through the opening in one swift movement. But the truth was that she only got through with a lot of pulling, effort, and grunting. Good thing this isn't my first time using an elevator escape hatch, Nancy thought, remembering her time investigating in Wickford Castle. That was game number 4. In the elevator hatch was a ladder. Nancy grabbed it and climbed up to the second floor, where she exited through the elevator doors. Below her, the elevator crashed to the ground with a sickening sound. Either that was an attempt to kill me, or the culprit hates that elevator as much as I do, Nancy said. Chapter 32, The Pigeon Puzzle. There was an emergency ladder which connected the 2 floors of the building, which Nancy used to get downstairs. She got the now printed fingerprint print and headed to the lounge. She melted Ryan's gummy bears on the small cooking pad, then poured the gelatin on the print. "Voila!" Nancy said, holding her creation upwards. "I have created a gelatin mold of Niko's fingerprint." Nancy went to Niko's secret lab and she used it to open the door. The secret lab was a little smaller than she expected, and it was covered with mechanical-looking gadgets that looked like props from a steampunk murder mystery movie. On a bookshelf to the left was a red magnet which was labeled 1 of 7. While looking over the area, Nancy found the other 6 magnets, in addition to one of Niko's audio diaries. At the far end of the room was a computer. Nancy couldn't turn it on because the box containing the computer's power grid was locked with a keyhole. "Seriously?" Nancy asked. "Why was there so much security in this place?
You'd think 4 secret messages and a fingerprint lock would be enough to keep the area secure, but Niko apparently disagreed. Nancy had no idea where to find the key, so she left Niko's hidden area and went straight to Niko's office to listen to the audio diary. One problem, though. Victor was in the office. "Hey, Victor," Nancy said slowly. "Any chance you could leave the office for, 5 minutes?"
Why?
"So I can snoop around in here? I mean, no reason."
I'm very busy, and I'm not leaving without a good reason, Victor said, crossing his arms.
"Oh, but, there's a good reason," Nancy said. "There's a cute girl outside the building named Deirdre Shannon, and she wants a tour of the facility."
That has nothing to do with me, Victor said.
"She likes bald guys with beards."
Victor jumped up quickly. I'd better get to her before Gray does,
he said. He ran out of the room, and Nancy put the audio diary into the player. This time, there were 3 messages. Number 1.
I got a new pigeon installed in my office today. The code is 13665. If something happens to me, hopefully someone will figure out what that means. I know some people think it's weird that I'm constantly preparing puzzles just in case I get murdered, but you can never be too prepared in this business.
Number 2.
I am so lonely. I haven't had a date in years. Not since that disaster with Emily Griffin. I know I'm not as popular with women as Mr. September, but you'd think at least one girl would like to date a workaholic electrical engineer who rarely leaves the office.
Number 3.
I was playing Nancy Drew Alibi in Ashes the other day, and I think it's cool that Alexi's shop is called Wardenclyffe. I've got a model of it in my secret lab. It's too bad the real Wardenclyffe tower was destroyed by Tesla's earthquake machine, set to frequency 37. Hint, hint, clue, clue.
Nancy turned to the mechanical pigeon in the corner of the room. There were a series of grooves on the panel in front of the pigeon, and the 7 magnets fit inside them perfectly. All she had to do was set them to the numbers Niko indicated, 13, 6, and 5. "I have no idea what I'm doing," Nancy said. She threw the magnets into the holes randomly, then hit the pigeon device until it started working. As a reward for her hard work, the pigeon's eyes projected the message 1902 patent on the wall. Nancy groaned. Once again, instead of giving her a direct answer about what he was doing, Niko left a clue, which led to another clue. This dude loved his puzzles. It's almost like he knew he was going to be murdered. He set up so many puzzles to his murder. Chapter 33, the video of Niko's death. Nancy returned to the science lab, which had its very own earthquake machine. Sure, it was out of place to have an earthquake machine and an electrical lab, but Nancy was grateful for the deadly plot device. The device was indeed deadly to the model of Wardenclyffe Tower, contained in Niko's secret area. Nancy put the tower inside the earthquake machine, then turned it on. She had a minor puzzle trying to get the frequencies to add up to 37, but since the solution was turn on all the switches except 2, it wasn't so bad. It turned out that the model was hollow, and hidden inside it was a key. Quickly recognizing it as the only key in the entire facility, Nancy took it to Niko's hidden area. She used it to open the locked power grid to the computer there. The computer was locked. Oh man, once again, I am skipping the computer grid power puzzle. Ooh, I guess I did that both times that puzzle appears in the game. Oh well. So Nancy she opened the locked computer grid to the computer. The computer is locked with a password, but Nancy knew what it was, the 1902 patent. It turned out that the computer could only do 2 things. It could play a video or copy that video to the flash drive. Nancy pressed the play button, and she saw that the video was the unedited security camera footage from the night of Niko's murder. How did Niko get the video of his death onto his private computer? Nancy asked. It was a legitimate question, considering that Niko was dead at the time the video was transferred from Gray's computer to Niko's. I think that's like one of the major complaints people have about the game. Like, how is this video saved by Niko when Niko was dead at the time? Nancy's questions about this plot device were answered when Victor appeared on screen. He was wearing a t-shirt that read, "I'm going to kill Niko today."
Aha, Nancy said. Niko must have seen Victor's t-shirt. That's how he knew to set up the video recording ahead of time. Ah, see, that's probably the real explanation for that question. Yeah, I solved the mystery. That's how Niko knew to prepare the video footage ahead of time. Victor entered the lab, and shortly afterwards, electricity filled the air. Victor then left the lab alone. Nancy knew this was decisive evidence that proved Victor's guilt, so she copied the video to a flash drive and walked out of the room, intent on calling the police. Flash drive detected. Initiating auto-wipe sequence, Niko's voice said from a speaker. Zap! Blue light filled the doorway to the room, completely destroying all of the electronics Nancy was holding, including the flash drive, her cell phone, and the door locker for her car. What? Nancy cried. Chapter 34. Yeah! Could you imagine a version of the game where this whole, like, zappity-zippity-zap doorway thing didn't happen? Because I totally could. Chapter 34. Trapped with a Killer. Nancy took a deep breath. Apparently, she needed to find a new flash drive and to try to get the video again. She made a mental note to ask her father if he could sue Niko's estate for destroying her property. Then she went upstairs on the fast ladder of fastness and picked up a spaceship-shaped flash drive from Ryan's area. Nancy hesitated for a second as she looked at Ryan's back. I think I can trust her, Nancy decided. Victor tried really hard to frame her, so she's probably not his accomplice. Ryan? Nancy asked. What's up? I solved the mystery, Nancy said. It turns out that Victor is the killer. I found the unedited security camera footage that proves it. Great! I mean, not great that I'm working for someone who'd rather kill me than pay me, but great that you figured it out. Did you call the police yet? No, my phone was killed by Niko's security system, along with all the evidence. Despite the fact that I have never seen this security system before, I know how to get past it, Ryan said. Just make a portable Faraday cage. You'll need this. Ryan gave Nancy a cardboard box labeled Important Plot Device. The box was filled with electrical parts. Since Victor is the only person here with a cell phone, and none of the computers connect to the internet, we can't contact the police, Ryan said. Ellie and I will drive to the police station on the snowmobiles and get some help. Wait, if you're leaving, does that mean I'll be stuck here alone with a killer? Yes. Even though he's incredibly dangerous and he's probably angry at me for eating all his candy? Play it cool, Nancy. Play it cool. As long as he doesn't know you've got proof, he won't have any reason to attack you. Ryan and Ellie left through the front door to Lossett Labs, which was located, somewhere. Yeah, we don't know where the front door is. Nancy went to the lounge to make the portable Faraday cage. Inside the lounge, Nancy saw Mason playing the Aggregation arcade game. Mason pressed the buttons furiously. Come on, high score, he said. I gotta get that high score. Mason? Nancy asked. You've been playing Aggregation this whole time? I haven't been playing that long, Mason said. He checked his watch. Only for 15 hours straight? That can't be right. Maybe you should go home and get some rest. Not until I find out who moved my paperclip, Mason said. Whoever it is, they will pay for their transgression. Eternal shame shall rain down upon them when they see that I have the high score at Aggregation. Right, Nancy said. Hey, do you know how to make a portable Faraday cage out of this box? Just wrap it with aluminum foil, then use a paperclip and a binder clip to divert the electrical flow, Mason said dismissively. Great, thanks, Nancy said. She followed his instructions and got him to double-check the box was correctly done. Then she went back to Niko's hidden area, copied the video onto the new flash drive, and put it inside her empty box. It worked perfectly! At least she thought it did. She couldn't tell the difference between a broken flash drive and a working one just by looking at it. Nancy left the Tesla coil lab, wondering why Ellie and Ryan decided to go to the police immediately instead of waiting 5 minutes to get this evidence. It would have been smarter to... Nancy stopped suddenly. Gray's unconscious body was lying on the ground. That's not good, Nancy said. Nancy decided safety was her top priority, and she retreated to Niko's hidden area. The fingerprint lock would prevent anyone besides her from entering. She waited a few hours, giving the police enough time to arrive and arrest Victor. I'm just kidding. No, what Nancy really did was run headfirst into danger. She opened the doors to the hallway where an angry Victor was waiting for her. I went outside, but there was no cute girl waiting for me like you said, Victor said, putting his hands on his hips angrily. So I called Deirdre Shannon, and guess what? She says that you and she have solved the mystery and caught the culprit. She's exaggerating in order to get a good grade on her paper, Nancy said quickly. I haven't told her yet that this flash drive contains the video footage of you committing the murder and... Oops. Victor lunged forward, his hands aimed at Nancy's throat. She choked, and her world went black. Chapter 35, The Final Puzzle. When Nancy woke up, she was inside the Faraday cage, inside the Tesla coil lab. Apparently, Victor had dragged her unconscious body a sizable distance. You're awake. Well, that's unfortunate for you. Victor, why are you doing this? Nancy whined. Stay out of the lab. That was the one thing I asked you to do, and you couldn't. You see, Nancy, I knew Niko had something hidden in here. I just couldn't find it, which is why I asked you to stay out. It would have been smarter if he asked her to find the hidden thing and then report to him immediately. You know what? If Victor had done that, things would have ended up much differently. Victor explained his plans in detail. He had purposely hired Nancy due to her reputation as an amateur sleuth, and the hope that she would believe all the false evidence against Ryan. When that didn't work, he planted false evidence against Mason and Ellie. Now I'm going to kill you, Nancy Drew, Victor said. He turned on the Tesla coil and electricity filled the air. If his plan is to electrocute me, why did he lock me in the Faraday cage to protect me? Nancy wondered. After all, he didn't do that when he killed Niko. But there was no time to worry about that now. The Faraday cage was strong, but it would break eventually if Victor kept attacking it with high-powered electricity. Nancy turned to the side of the cage where the emergency lightning rod box was located. All she had to do was raise the lightning rod to divert the electricity away. Opening the box, Nancy found that the circuit board was empty, except for a mess of wires. Fortunately, Victor had taken away none of her things, including the video of him committing murder. Yeah, he leaves it in Nancy's inventory. That's so weird. It was also fortunate that the electrical circuits and the schematic that Ryan gave Nancy just happened to be for this exact circuit board. What a lucky twist of fate. Nancy took out the circuits and applied them to the circuit board, with some help from the circuitry book. I don't know if she had a soldering gun to cement the circuits into place, but it wouldn't surprise me if she did. When Nancy was finished, the lightning rod was raised. Instead of using the lightning rod button in the control room, Victor decided to open the door and step out into the room while the Tesla coil was active. He was quickly zapped with electricity and fell unconscious. While it was good that Victor had been stopped, Nancy was still stuck inside the Faraday cage. She couldn't leave until the Tesla coil was deactivated, but it was impossible for anyone to go inside the control room and turn the Tesla coil off. So how did Nancy escape? I don't know. Maybe Ellie came back with the police and unplugged the room from outside? Gray woke up and saved her. Yeah, let's say that happened. Chapter 36. Letters. Dear Dad. Well, another mystery solved. It turned out that Victor was the killer. He hired me in order to frame Ryan for Niko's death. You'd think he would have left the situation alone after the police closed the murder investigation, but I suspect he's not as smart as he pretends to be. After all, he did walk right into the pathway of an active Tesla coil machine. Speaking of which, it turns out that the Tesla coil machine can be activated and deactivated remotely. Who knew? You think someone would have mentioned that at some point? After all, the coil was used as a murder weapon. Victor has been sent to jail, and he gave a full confession, in hopes of getting a leniency deal. But I doubt there will be much leniency to be had, though. At least, that's what I heard from his cellmate, Detective Beach. As soon as the police left, Mason transferred all the lab's files to a flash drive and fled the country. He tried to sell Niko's information to a foreign country in exchange for an unlimited supply of paper clips. Fortunately, Gray managed to stop him. A video of their argument entitled Epic Nerd Fight has gone viral on the internet. It's the second most viewed video on YouTube, after the epic rap battles of mystery video I made with the Hardy Boys. Speaking of the Hardy Boys, I got a message from them on my phone. The two of them were in a life or death situation, and Frank said, "Nancy, I have to tell you something important. I love..." The message was cut off after that. I called them back to make sure they were okay, and I reassured Frank that I already know he loves cheeseburgers. For some reason, he sounded depressed after that. Brian quit her job and is now working for a gummy bear factory. She rides her motorcycle around town on the weekends. Meanwhile, Ellie is moving back to Georgia, which coincidentally is the location of the next Nancy Drew game. I made that joke already in this story. I shouldn't be repeating jokes. Bad Arglefumph, bad Arglefumph. Be a more creative writer. As for Niko, the fingerprint I found revealed that Niko was secretly Nikola Tesla the whole time. Can you believe it? Tesla didn't die in 1943. That was all a big fake. As a result of one of his electrical experiments, he found a way to make the electrical pulse of his heartbeat continue long past normal human capacity. If he hadn't been killed, he probably would have lived forever. Yeah, that's right. Nikola Tesla Frankensteined himself into immortality. Yeah, that is creative. It's too bad I never got to meet him. I could have told him the secret to staying as a teenager your entire life. It's worked for me for the past 82 years. Love, Nancy. Dear Deirdre, I heard what you tried to do to Ned. I don't care if we're buddies now. Stay away from my boyfriend, okay? Nancy. Alright, so that is the end of Nancy Drew, the Deadly Plot Device. I hope you enjoyed this story. Check out my other parody stories. I've done Nancy Drew, Worst of Blackmore Manor, Mystery of the 6.5 Keys, Secrets Can Chill. Actually, that's it. I think I've only done the 4 Nancy Drew parody stories. But hey, who knows? Maybe these videos will be popular and I will feel motivated to write another one. Let me finish this video with some secret stuff that I've never shown anyone. I did start a parody story of Nancy Drew's Secret of the Odd Clock, but I gave up very quickly. Let me read just everything I wrote for this. Nancy Drew's Secret of the Odd Clock. Chapter 1. Unexplained Time Travel. The year? 1930. The place? The road to Titusville, where Nancy Drew is behind the wheel of her blue roadster, pondering this question. What the heck is going on? Nancy looked left and right, trying to figure out where she was. She had never seen this place before, and there appeared to be no signs on the unpaved roads. Where was she? Last thing I remember, I was writing a letter to Ned about my adventures in Blackmore Manor, Nancy thought, and now I'm here. Whatever that... Whoa, is that an antique car? That's crazy. Who leaves one of those out in the middle of nowhere like that? The road came to a sudden stop in front of a building. Nancy hit the brakes and put the car in park. Or at least she tried to. The car was a stick shift, and Nancy had no idea which of the 6 handle positions was park, or why there was a 3rd car pedal, for that matter. It took her about 20 seconds of trying every position before she figured out which one parked the car. She sighed with relief and turned off the car. She opened the side door, stepped out, and landed face first on the ground. Ow! Why did I... Huh? Nancy looked to see what was wrong with her legs, only to notice that she was wearing a long, flouncy dress. What happened to my fashionable high-waist jeans? She wondered. Nancy reached into her pocket and pulled out her trusty cell phone, ready to call her friends and or Google how to drive a stick shift. Sadly, the phone had no signal. Nancy groaned. There's no internet here? Why don't they have internet at... She looked up and read the sign in front of the building. The Lilac Inn? A hotel without internet? Ugh, no thank you. And then I've only wrote 2 other sentences after that. Nancy walked to the front of the building when she noticed a phone on the wall. At least she was pretty sure it was a phone. So yeah, I wrote like about a page of another Nancy Drew parody story, and that's as far as I got. But that's not all. You know how the bonus scenes at the end of The Deadly Device have Gummy Bear Theater? So I once thought about making a bunch of videos in that style. But Nancy Drew Theater presents The Silent Spy. My name is Nancy Drew, and I like solving mysteries. Hello, Miss Spy. Do you know anything about my mother's death? Not talking, huh? Well, this is boring. I'm going to make some cookies now. Bye!
The end.
The joke being that the spy doesn't say anything because it's a silent spy. Nancy Drew Theater presents The Secret of the Old Clock. My name is Nancy Drew, and I like solving mysteries. Look, there's an old clock. Hello, old clock. Will you tell me your secret?
No.
The end. Nancy Drew Theater presents The Secret of Shadow Ranch. My name is Nancy Drew, and I like solving mysteries. Dave, Shadow Ranch is so cool. What's the secret? We put up lots of umbrellas, so there are plenty of shadows at the ranch. Oh, that makes sense. The end. Nancy Drew Theater presents Shadow at the Water's Edge. My name is Nancy Drew, and I like solving mysteries. Hello, scary monster. Can you tell me about the scary, you're a monster? Nancy runs away. The end. Nancy Drew Theater presents Trail of the Twister. My name is Nancy Drew, and I like solving mysteries. According to this weather chart, the Twister went from point A to point B. That's the trail it followed. The end. And here's the last one I wrote. Nancy Drew Theater presents Secret of the Scarlet Hand. My name is Nancy Drew, and I like solving mysteries. Hello, Mr. Scarlet Hand. Hey, wait a second. You're colored vermilion, not scarlet.
Darn, you figured out my secret.
The end. That's the last one. I don't have any other Nancy Drew Theater video scripts that I wrote. It was just an idea I had after playing The Deadly Device. I never made them into videos because I figured it would annoy people if I made a bunch of 20-second videos. All of them basically being a joke based on the titles of various Nancy Drew games.